In these My Chemical Romance episodes, my elder emo best friend and I relive our angsty glory days and explore the deep bond we've shared with music, from teenage rebellion to the chaos of modern motherhood. Join Sarah and I as we dive into the soundtracks of our lives, dissecting the songs that shaped us, the bands that saved us, and the lyrics that still hit differently. Whether we're reminiscing about mosh pits or singing lullabies with emo vibes, one thing's for sure, wasn't a phase, Mom. Tune in for heartfelt stories, nostalgic throwbacks, and a celebration of the music that keeps us forever emo at heart. All right, we are back at it again. I missed you. It's been so long since we talked. So now we're back on track with our usual conversations for My
Yes.
Chemical Romance. So do you want to intro? Like, what are we actually talking about today, though?
So today we're going to explore a little bit about how our music roots shaped the way that we approach being moms and raising kids together. Especially because we grew up in the very same scene, just different parts of the country, and have had very similar approaches, I think, to how we wanted to grow into parenthood with our children and allowing us both to be like teachers to each other, and then taking experiences that we had as kids and saying like, well, how are we going to be different and better, and where did that come from?
Yeah. I think I love that you touched on like how similar like our lives were, but like on completely different sides of like Turtle
Yes.
Island. And I think that is something that I've mentioned a lot of like what I love so much about music is how like unifying it is and how there are so many universal experiences, especially people that were like in our scene for music that like we had that completely paralleled each other and we were
Hmm.
where near each other. It's like, 'cause I know there have been so many times that we've talked about like shows. I was like, I was at that show too. It's just I was
Right.
in
Yeah.
Atlanta for the show. And so I that's something that is I just I really because we talked about this in a previous episode of trying to figure out what that is like for kids today, like growing up in like
Mm,
music and not seeing like any other genre that kind of has that connector, that like we had, like with emo and pop punk. And I just, for the sake of this podcast in general, I think we are just kind of lumping it together. And I know that
yeah.
people are going to have a lot of feelings about it. People are going to come at us, but it is very hard to like separate the two. And like you call one thing emo and people are like, that's pop punk. So we're just using it all as one little thing. Because I think there are some people that are separatists and elitists and all the things, but like for the most part, like we were listening to both. Like that's the scene that like we were in.
Yeah,
Um
there was some hardcore and stuff in there too. Like I think that there were, there was room for a lot of different things.
yeah, because I mean when you talk about like the use, like that doesn't necessarily
Thursday.
blend to like emo or
Yeah.
pop. But like so is yeah. I've never been like much of a genre snob. So
Nah, I don't have it in me.
I'm too tired. So
Yeah, I got other things to worry about,
like raising kids.
like
But
raising kids.
I think something that I really was thinking about and us discussing that we wanted to do this episode is how I first off for background, which I think a lot of people probably know by now because we've done several of these episodes, but Sarah and I we met interning for an organization that was centered around mental health and particularly the connections that between mental health and like music. And so we were both interns there and like our love for each other just kind of grew from that. So that's like even the background we have of like how we like came together. Um but particularly within the music genres that we were just talking about, the reason that I feel that I think I can say for both of us, the reason we connected to that was because of our mental health struggles and
Hmm.
because we were for the first time not feeling so alone because we were hearing what we were feeling echoed like in song lyrics
Yes.
and it made you feel less crazy.
Yeah.
It's something that I know people that like don't listen to this music would never understand it and it's hard to explain. But like hearing someone else talk about wanting to commit suicide or
Yeah.
self-injury or any of those things, it made me feel hopeful. Like, it was the reason that
Mhm.
I do it because I think so much, and I'm not gonna say all of it, but, like, so much of, like, mental health struggles is isolation and
Yeah.
feeling like there's something wrong with me because I'm the only person that's feeling this, and so hearing someone saying like, "No, I'm actually feeling this too," and not only am I feeling it, like, I'm openly talking about it, so
Yeah.
I'm normalizing having these conversations, I think was kind of like the saving grace for, like, so many of us.
Mhm. Yeah, and not just I mean, not everybody got to go to shows. Some people lived in places where they didn't have access to that, but for you and me, it was also not just hearing the music, but then standing in rooms, sometimes with only, like, 20 people, but sometimes with, like, 200 or more people. Sometimes we went to Warped Tour and it was thousands of people, and knowing that that's how many people were out there experiencing this music at roughly the same time that we were experiencing it, and we're having those same feelings and we're identifying with it. So it really it wasn't just like, "Hey, this has enough of a platform that these records are selling and these bands are able to keep going." It's also like we had places that were community for us to go
Mhm.
and have that experience, and our internship is an example of that. I mean, how many weeks did that internship run with, like, groups of, like, 20 kids every single time? And they were over flooded with applications. They had way more applications than they ever could have processed, right?
Right. Like,
So
and looking at community of, like, realizing, like, what that community could look like, because for me, like, I mean, I live in very rural Alabama, we were not
mhm,
having, like, shows that were coming here, the closest place for shows was Atlanta, which was 5 hours away. So, I
yeah,
mean, at 11, 12 years old when I'm getting into this music, I was not going to Atlanta for these shows. So, for the early years for me, I found that community online, like,
yeah.
through Journal, through Diaryland, through Zynga, through, like, all and then eventually
Yeah.
MySpace, like, which is funny now, like, everyone feels like MySpace is the ultimate nostalgia, and it's like, "Oh, that's how you know you're old." I knew a time before MySpace existed. So, Zynga and LiveJournal, and then eventually it grew to MySpace. But, like, that was where I was able, to find my community, and I always, like, craved that one day I could, like, be in these spaces and see these bands, and so, thankfully, I guess I think I was 14 or 15 when I finally got to go to Warped Tour for the first
Mhm,
time, and so that was my first, like, real concert, like, experience. Um,
right.
and so I think, like, for us, well, I'll say for me, I'll just speak for myself. Like, I grew up in an environment where mental health was not something that was talked about. It for several, and like now that I've grown and gotten older, I'm able to really like dissect that and like understand like why, but it was like a twofold thing of like, one, like I did grow up in a very religious household
Mm,
that it was very much believed that, okay, anything that's going on with you, you just pray about it and it goes away. And if it's
okay.
not going away, you're not praying enough. So it's like you don't need Lincoln Park, you just need Jesus. Like, so that was
Stop
very
listening to Finch, watch it burn, and start praying hard.
thankfully, we had people like Flyleaf that were coming around. It's like, hey, no, actually, I'm Christian and I'm still like a little messed up in the head. So like that was really good for me. And Skillet and all these people. But like I Hawk Nelson, like rely like I can go on and on. But like I definitely went through like the church punk like phase. Was very much
Okay.
into adrenaline, like all of these things. And interesting enough, like most of these people are not even religious anymore. So I think there's a pipeline there that can be like talked about. Um, but like yeah, so part of it was like growing up in like a religious environment, so we didn't talk about these things. And then also there was definitely the race dynamic, which is something that I really started to dissect during our internship
Mhm.
of like, even looking around like while we were there. I was the only Black person that was there. Like
You don't say.
in every week of the internship,
Yeah.
there were other Black people.
Yeah.
Like, and those were conversations that I didn't know how to have at the time, like, while I
Mhm.
was actually but I started to, like, unpack later of, like, how no, I won't even say problematic, like, how dangerous this is, because I feel
Mhm.
like that really fed into me struggling for so long, because
Mm.
even, like, family had this idea of, like, this is not something that impacts people that look like us, like, this is a white people problem, and so, for me, like I said, it was the religion and the race issue of, like, why these things were not talked about, like, in my home. And so I turned the music, like I didn't have and now again, I wanna make sure, like, I totally give the caveat of that my mom and I have worked through a lot and a lot of therapy, and, like, we're in a great, great place now, so this is not a, like, bash on my mom thing, but I think she was doing the best she could with what she had, and so I think because of the trauma I received of not having a mom that understood what was happening and me having to so heavily rely on music, I in turn have kind of went the polar opposite
Mm,
of and like now being a mom and raising my child of that feelings are something that we talk about all the time and we normalize all feelings. There's no such thing as a bad feeling and that there's nothing that you can't talk about. Because I feel like with us, especially growing up in the time of like MySpace and Zynga and all those things,
mhm.
like we kind of learned to be oversharers on the
Yeah.
internet because the people in our own lives and within our families we weren't able to talk to them. So we had to talk
Mhm.
to the strangers, which is great. And I'm thankful because my best friends, like even how I got that internship was all
Yeah.
from talking to strangers
Yep.
like on the internet. So there's so much good that came from it. But I just, as a mom, I honestly would feel like my biggest failure is if child did that not by choice, or did that
Mm.
like she felt like she had to because she couldn't come to me. I feel like that was such a long like info dump type thing. So I'll pause for a second. But like I want to know what for you of like what was your relationship like, particularly since we're talking about like us as moms, like with your mom and like how that kind of pushed you to the type of music and community that you craved.
Yeah. So I will say, as like so many things, we have a bit of a parallel here in that I was also raised in a super religious household, right? And so I got a lot of that as well. Um why don't you just try some youth groups? Why don't you just try some more plug in to some of these things, right? And for a while I did. I think that my parents were not like trying to avoid talking about feelings, but that they did not have a language that directed them to go straight to the point for it. So
Yeah.
they'd want to know like what the problem was and they'd want to solve the problem rather than figure out what the feeling is and sit with the feeling, right?
Mm,
And I think you and I sometimes are similar in this way that, like, if I've got a feeling and I know, like, the circumstance that's generating it, I need to process it for a while. And that can be in my own head. That can just be spinning over it over and over and over again, having almost like internal conversations about it. That can sometimes be dissecting it with another person, being like, and you know what? Another thing, this also makes me upset, or this also makes me confused, or whatever, right? Like, we didn't have that. And that's really what I needed to process a lot of this stuff. And
mhm,
they also didn't have tools for a lot of processing, and they also did not have a lot of time for processing. And so, and they were had never been given the space to do that themselves growing up either, right? So they were, building off of what they knew. But the one thing that I got super lucky about, and I think I've talked about this maybe in like our first podcast episode, is that my dad grew up in a household that didn't understand his music, didn't care about him getting to see his music, didn't understand him and his attachment to his music. And so he was doing a lot of that stuff, sometimes almost like sneaking to go see concerts or like taking off in the middle of the night to drive. And his big band was the Grateful Dead. So he'd finish a shift at Dairy Queen and then like hop on his Harley and ride all the way from Illinois to Florida to go see them or something crazy like that. Right. And so like thankfully, if nothing else, my parents were very supportive of my attachment to music. So even though they didn't have the language, they didn't have the tools, and they directed me in a different way to try and deal with the feelings that I had that they were not like equipped to process with me. Um, I never had anybody keeping me from the music. And I know we've talked about this before too. Like I was going to concerts as young as like 13, right? And my parents were taking me. And we had, because I grew up in Seattle, which is much closer, a major metropolitan area, we had shows all the time. So I always had access to this stuff.
mhm,
And that was very, I think, huge for me in terms of making it through some of the things that we were talking about in terms of our similar mental health struggles and in terms of, um, like what we were trying to cope with and figure out as we were living it. And if I had not had that, I think there would have been a much different impact with my family relationships, right? Because they weren't gonna do that processing with me. They weren't gonna figure that stuff out for me or with me. So at least I had this other community that I was like, I had an open swinging door to. They would drive me to the shows. They would, take me to wherever I needed to go to buy Ticketmaster tickets in person because that's where you used to do it at a grocery store, at a grocery store rather than just like in some online queue. And I think that that made a huge difference for me. And allowing me to start that processing too at such a young age because I lived in a place where I could plug into that community much earlier. It was never not confusing, but I think it was far safer in the long run for me because I had that space much earlier in life.
Yeah, and I think like there is something to be said for like the way you explained of that. It wasn't just necessarily that our families, like our parents, like didn't want to talk about these things.
Right.
It just never was. I don't even know how to explain that. That just wasn't a thing, you know? It was like there was no words for this. There was no
Right.
it's not, "Oh, we're just staying away from this." It's just they couldn't even, like, compute that, and I really feel like our generation was one of the first generations to actually kind of figure out, "Okay, what does it look like to have a space where we are talking about these things? What does it look like to also," like how we just talked about, of holding space, to hold space for other people that are experiencing these things. Like, I feel like our generation, like, we really just started to try to figure it out because we didn't have, like, a roadmap for this either, but we knew something was missing and we knew something, like, had to change. So we just kinda started figuring it out, and so now,
Huh?
obviously, a lot of this is very normalized, like, it's cool to go to therapy, it's cool to, like, do all these things, but I feel like
Right.
with that, like, time period, we were just starting to figure it out, and, like, we opened the door for everyone else being, like, oversharers on the internet and going to therapy and things. Like, but I think it's a very beautiful thing of that your family not keeping you away from music, and
Yeah.
that's something that I also try to replicate, like, with Delia, because I will say that my mom, she didn't understand it. Like, I
Yeah.
mean, this is a 90s R&B household, and it's like, "What right now." But she never my mom was such a music person, so she never kept me away from that. Because even though I said it's a
Mhm.
not be household, it also the very first piece of music that I ever got was on cassette, and it was Def
Yep.
Leppard Hysteria.
Oh, I
Like
love that.
like, handed that down to me, and then eventually I end up getting Nirvana In Utero, like, on cassette, but, like, those were things, like, like, from my mom, and so she has always really appreciated music. It's just, again, for me, where we lived, we didn't
It's
have
very
options.
different music though.
Yeah, totally different, like, me I don't know, obviously, my cat's name is Kurt Cobain, so some things kinda stuck with me, um, and when Pour Some Sugar comes on in karaoke, like, I'm all about it, so, like, but that was something that I really loved, that my mom was like, "I don't understand this, I don't get it, this is not my
Yeah.
thing, I appreciate that you love this, and I'm just
Right.
doing what I can," and
Right.
so I feel like that's kinda how things have been going, like, with Delia, of, like, I have been allowing her to, like, explore her own, like, music taste. I'm not gonna lie, I'm definitely like, "Okay, you gotta, like, let's ease something corporate in there," which I was glad that she really loved, and there's, like, some classics that I'm like, "You've gotta love and, like, appreciate," but for the most part, I've let her just explore and grow and figure things out on
Oh,
her
yeah.
own, and if it means that we're listening to K-pop Demon Hunter soundtrack on repeat. Like, this is, like, what she loves, and I love that she is, like, figuring out the way that, like, music can, like, speak to her, and I think
Yeah.
even at she just turned 6 years old and she's realizing the magnitude of music.
Okay, wait, I have to ask, does Delia have a playlist? Like, if she tells you she likes a song, do you have a playlist that you add it to?
Add into it, yes.
Yes. Okay, Aurora does the same thing, and that playlist is
Yes.
wild.
It is
Some of the
very,
stuff on
very
there.
It is definitely a sporadic playlist, and, like, how it started off actually was because, like, it was my Spotify, so I would give her like, every time she found a song, I'd add it to her playlist, and then now we finally, because it just got to a point where it was a battle, like, she is
Yeah.
really into music now, and I wanna listen to my music, so I've sent her up her own Spotify account now so she can make her own things, but
Okay.
yeah. that she had a growing, like, playlist. Um, and so I wonder, okay, so, like, for you, and as we said, we use the music to process so many, like, of our emotions, like,
Mhm.
how are you with your daughter in having those conversations around feelings? Like, what does that look like for you that you feel like may have been different than when that you experienced growing up?
Well, I should probably start with the fact that, like, my personality as a kid is so different from my kid. Like, okay, I mean, you know her, the internet doesn't know her. My kid is a very, like, in her body, but not in her head type of person. Like, she just wants to be out there doing things, and a lot of times she doesn't stop to necessarily think before she does things. I was a very in my head kid, and I always was, you know? I also started reading from a really young age, so I learned that kind of internal storytelling, that kind of internal monologue that you learn when you're reading stories and picturing them in your head, right? So, that is not my kid. My kid, she wants to pick the book out, but she has no interest in touching it ever again after that. Like,
I've
she
heard
just
such stories with your kid. I know.
yeah. So, like, so for me, I had a lot of feelings that were really big feelings, and I needed somewhere to put them. I needed someone to relate to them. I needed a way to name them. I needed all these things, right? My kid, it is like pulling teeth. I'm like, "Hey, look, the way you're acting, I know there's a feeling." And I'm like, "Can we just like stop for a minute and name it?" And she's like, "No. I gotta go run 5 miles or I need to do a 13-mile hike or like, you know." So she's just in a very different place. So I think the best thing that I can do at this stage, right, is that she knows that I'm willing to have those conversations with her if and when she decides she needs them, but she's just not at a point now where she feels the need to do that. And we have check-ins sometimes. Sometimes I'll say like, um, "Do you ever feel like I'm distant or do you ever feel like um there's things that you are communicating to me that I'm not like receiving and how does that make you feel and can we do those things differently or whatever?" And I try and really like take consistent reflection of my parenting and stop and have those moments with her. But she has the attention span of about 2 minutes for that stuff. And then she's like, "Can we like go ride a bike? Can we, whatever?" So it is interesting to me because I'm so used to being the person who wants to talk about my feelings. Like, even today, like when I'm having feelings, I want to ruminate on them for a while. It takes me a while to get through them. I probably am going to talk to at least 3 different people about the same scenario, and I'm going to have at least 5 different conversations with each of those 3 people, right? And she's just not interested in that. So it is really interesting to me, having been a person who developed all this, like all these tools and everything, realizing how critical they were for me and the big feelings that I was having, and then seeing that at least for the way she and who she is right now, that's not something that's a need for her. So all I can do is, keep my tools handy, and then if the day ever comes, I'm ready. But it is interesting trying to be the person who's like, "Hey, I would like to spend time on this," and she's like, "Bye, suckers! Like I got stuff to do."
Gosh, I don't, maybe we should switch for a while because that I have complete opposite. Like, I'm Aurora in this situation, and Delia is the one that's like, "Can you just hold me while we talk about it?" I'm like, "No. Can we, like, go do something and just not think about it?" Delia feels everything so deeply and wants to have 3-hour conversations about that one feeling, and
Oh
I
man.
like, "Girl, I'm maxed out,
Hmm.
emotionally tapped out." And it's an interesting, like, shift because I think growing up, like, that's how I was. I'm like, I had all these feelings, I needed to talk about it to people, that's why I started building this massive online platform at,
Yeah.
like, then. Like, I needed to get all this out and be constantly talking about it all the time, and so now there's been this weird shift, like, as an adult where I'm just like, I am maxed out, and now I just wanna run away from
Mm,
it. Like, or I
mm.
out. Like, I just wanna listen to music and hear other people, and, like, I don't wanna talk about myself, like, at all. And I don't know if that, like, comes from also, like, doing so much deep work on myself in like the past few years. And so now I'm just talked out and I have this child that wants to like keep going. And I'm like, okay, why don't you call Auntie Sarah?
Right.
Because
Yeah.
Mama and your cousin Aurora, we're gonna go hike and you two can sit and talk about your feelings and we'll catch y'all later.
No, see, the problem is we just need to get all y'all on a hike, except I don't think either of you are doing 13 miles with me and Aurora. I got to say, I have a feeling that's not happening. And that's like her minimum to get like her energy down to a level where she can pay attention to what her brain has been trying to tell her or things that her brain has been trying to think is like 8 miles. So Dahlia and I can spend that entire time talking, but you guys have to get to the point where you can do 8 miles.
Yeah, that's happening. I think I really think Dahlia would love it. Like she wants, which I hate. It's just like I physically can't do
Right.
like that like
Right.
anymore. I feel like Dahlia would be so like into it.
Well,
She
we'll
would
take her.
that she's talking the whole time though.
Hmm.
Like I that like doing something physical is going to like tire her out and she can't like nope, it does not stop. She'll like have to
Nope.
catch a breath every once in a while, but she's gonna
Yeah.
get all this whole story out. So, like if it takes the full 10 miles, like she's gonna get it out. Which I think again is I don't know that and it's hard to say this because, again, it was not something that I tried growing up. So I honestly don't know what
Mhm.
the reaction would have been, but I did not feel safe enough to like devour that type of information. And
Mm.
so I think I have or at least I hope that I have sort of nurtured this environment with my child and stuff now of like me being the parent where she feels comfortable enough that she can, even though I don't want to hear it most of the time, she feels comfortable enough that
Yeah.
she can talk to me about these things. And I think for me, it's because we know a lot of the things a lot of the things that were discussed and the music that we were listening to that we related to was because we were doing those same things.
Mhm.
And most of those were not, I don't know, I think healthy is a subjective word, but I think that most
Optimal. We're not the best choice.
professionals would
Yeah.
think that these were not healthy coping mechanisms.
Yeah.
I personally just full caveat, like I am of the belief of that I'm still here, you know? And so I did what I had to do like to survive and get to this point. So for me, it was like healthy. It allowed me to survive. But anyway, like we know what the things that we were doing as a result like of these feelings and things that were being
Mhm.
like in the music. And so am I think that's something that I'm trying to think of how to like phrase it. Do you think about because we kind of started this conversation a little bit in the first like episode, but I wonder if it shifts a little bit now thinking about your kid. We talked about how we listened to this music and it, like you said, it was something that kept us alive, but also in normalizing a lot of the I don't know what all I can and can't say on, like, Spotify, so I'm, like,
Yeah.
trying to go around
Right.
so I guess I should say, like, trigger warning for, people that may be listening that are sensitive to things like this, but a lot of the behaviors that we were, like, doing to ourselves were normalized in a lot of the music that we were listening to, which on one hand was helpful in the sense of that we felt less crazy and we felt less
Yeah.
alone, but also, being totally honest, they didn't normalize it, you know? And so it felt like, okay, well, other people are doing this, so it is okay for me to continue this. And so, whereas obviously it helped us and it supported us and all those things, do you have concerns now with your children listening to that same music and having those same coping mechanisms normalized? And I say normalized and not glorified because I know a
Right.
lot of
Right.
people that are opponents of this type of music, they're like, "It's glorifying it." I don't think it's glorifying it, but it is
No.
normal.
No. Well, and here's the thing. You have to remember that the same things that we're talking about in terms of what our parents were able to give us in terms of tools and options for processing what we were doing and experiencing are the same, if not maybe worse, tools that the folks who are writing this music at the time that we were young had, which
Mhm.
means that they were creating solutions, they were discussing solutions with the only amount of information that they had.
Mhm.
If it was us today as parents, where mental health has been given a much bigger stage, where more tools are discussed more readily, where therapy is offered that allows people to explore other options more readily. Because like when I was a kid, I at best maybe knew like 2 people in my entire high school, which was thousands kids that were in therapy, right?
Mhm.
It wasn't a done thing. So I think the difference today is that back then, those seemed like the only tools. I mean, we were just searching for tools. I think if other tools had been offered, that we might have tried other things.
True. Yeah.
But that wasn't something that was being offered in a way that was accessible and reachable for the general population, right? So
Mm.
I think that the kids today who might listen to that music also have resources in terms of their own families, their own friends, a lot of mental health dialogue that occurs in online spaces that they frequent regularly, possibly their own therapist or counselor or whatever, that are going to be way more versed and way more available and reachable consistently to offer alternative tools than what we had. And so again, it's kind of like, you were talking about how we were building community and spaces from the ground up at a much younger age than and that kind of created a lot of these spaces that the next generations are enjoying today. It's the same thing here. Us being that, guinea pig generation, for lack of a better term, and having gone through it and then come out the other side and then taking ownership of where we were at as adults with our mental health and pursuing other options means that we are now equipped with other tools. And I think that that means that if these kids are having those conversations based on identifying with this music, other things will be presented to them as well. So no, I don't think it's glorifying it. I don't think it's gonna necessarily normalize it in the same way. Um, but, like, I think normalizing it is also a two-sided coin too, right? Like, a lot of people like to think that normalize almost means, like, it's giving permission to, right? And I don't think that that's the case. I think that in this case, normalize just for me meant it made you feel normal that you had those thoughts. It didn't necessarily mean that anybody thought it was okay or like a great choice. I
That's
think we were all pretty aware because we weren't just sitting in circles somewhere doing it together like we were knitting
secret. Yeah.
sweaters.
Yeah.
So I think we all knew that something about it was not really the best option, but like what other options were being presented to us? What other things, what other outlets, other than going to these shows and talking about it with other people were we having? And so I think that that really is the way I would want to characterize that word in this case too.
I appreciate that. I think that because I hadn't even like considered that because I've struggled a lot with trying to put that into words because obviously I hate the other side of that, all the rhetoric of like this type of
Mhm.
music glorified certain behaviors and all those things because obviously I know this is something that saved my life. So I'm like, this is not like whatever.
Yeah.
But I do think it's important to remember that although we were realizing that we're not alone and that these things are normalized and stuff per se, it still was something where there was still this shame and stigma like
Yes.
attached to it. Like I said, we weren't
Yes.
having like cutting circles and stuff like happening. Like it was
Right.
still lots of bracelets, like a long
Yeah.
sleeve, still. But so yeah, and I think it's really important to recognize that that is really okay, now I'm, like, going down this, like, deep rabbit hole, like, in my brain. I think that is, like, so important, so, like, it finally just, like, clicked with me that, like, these 2 things can exist, like, at the same time. Like, there can be something where it's normalized in the sense of that, like, I don't feel crazy, like, there's nothing wrong well, I said there is something wrong with me, but, like, there were things that were wrong with us, like, we needed help.
Yeah.
Like that didn't come from Jesse Lacey, but like we, but it was, we didn't feel so isolated and alone in these feelings. I think
Mhm.
is like getting at, but also that like these were not things that needed to be glorified. These were not things that still didn't have some sort of shame or stigma like attached to it for like better or worse. And So yeah, so anyway, now I feel like there's gotta be a whole, like, conversation around that, but, like, yeah, I really appreciate you saying that, and so I'm wondering, like, what do those other avenues look like for us though as parents now of like how it's like we didn't have these other avenues, so this is
Yeah.
just what we have. What is it that you feel that you are creating just even in your personal life, like as a mom, to give your daughter, like who is very young, other avenues, even like starting like at this age?
Yeah. I mean, so I know that this isn't true for everybody, but for me, a lot of my mental health really is attached to how much outside in like far away from cities nature I'm getting.
Mhm.
Um and also how much exercise I'm getting. And I really want to put a like a little asterisk on this because I know that there's like this whole gym culture that I think is kind of out of control, and I don't want people to think that like doing these things means you have to either A, look a certain way, or B, you need to go crazy and spend all your time out in a gym or out in nature or whatever. Like, I think there's balance to it. But, I really had to, like, I went through kind of a tough, probably like 3.5, almost 4 years when my kid was first born because she couldn't go do all those activities with me. And I was limited by how much I could do while also carrying her. And so now that she has reached an age where she can do like these longer things and she's more able to participate on her own feet with me and doing these things, I'm able to say, okay, well, I know I need that. And I know that I'm teaching her that, right? I'm teaching her that sometimes you need to be outside of a city. Sometimes you need to be in a place where you don't hear anything other than nature noises. For me, I everybody who knows me really well knows that I suffer if I don't have ocean time at some point, at least, every so often, and that's part of that too. She knows and she always will know that I went to therapy, and that's gonna always be an obvious option for her. And, as she grows up, the amount of times I'm in a conversation with somebody and I go, "Hey, I think it's time for therapy," like that's gonna rub off too. And I think the other thing is I think that if we continue to show up and you and I do this, we've, spent time and we're making time and plans to do this more often, but she sees me in really deep community friendships. She sees me and she knows that I go to people when I have problems. I
Mhm.
don't just hold on to my problem. I go to people and we work it out together. And we work it out in a way that is healthy, and we work it out in a way that's, basically like talk therapy with friends. And I think that that's really important too. And also like I think the amount of us who didn't have access to art therapy, I think the amount of us who didn't have access to like journaling in a regimented way, not just like, "Oh, I'm gonna write my dear diary today," or whatever, but like, I'm really gonna explore a topic that I need to explore to unpack some things,
Mhm.
and I'm gonna write dedicatedly about that prompt. I think that that's really important too. And some of those things, especially because 'cause they're tactile, I think are extra important in this day and age where almost everybody does everything online, right? Lots of art is digital art. Lots of art is not made in person art with your hands, things like that. So I think that encouraging those things as options and handing those off and saying like, "Look, if you identify with this music, if you identify with these themes, then, I think I know where you're at." And here's some other things that we can do with it, if you need to. And then the other thing too is I think, I grew up, especially in schools, I remember so many times because I was like a crier real early, right? And I grew up so many times in schools where teachers would say to me, "I'm not going to talk to you unless you're going to stop crying first." Now, I will sometimes tell my kid if I can't understand her
Understand you,
that I
exactly.
need her to, scale it back a little bit so that I can hear what she's trying to say to me, but I will never tell her that she can't cry, right? And I think that's the other thing too, is I think we were kind of that last generation where people were like, "Hey, you can't cry," or "You need to, stuff that down," or "You need to put that away," or whatever, and I'm not gonna be that with my kid. My kid is gonna have the option to come to me and to just have a good cry, right? If she just wants to say like, "Hey, I'm just feeling really sad." I'm like, "Okay, do you wanna cry about it?" Like, not in a mean way, not like, you know,
Yep.
like the way a bully would say it to you, but
Because we never
yeah,
were told that was an option. because even the things like you were saying about like the art therapy and processing things, like I think is very important. And I think we really started to lean into that with kind of our generation was kind of the creation of like the online journals. And so we
Mhm.
were able to like really write out and like process things kind of out loud and put it out there for like other people, which I think is such a wonderful thing and needs to happen. But I also think that there are some times where like you don't have to talk about it. You don't have to try to
No.
figure it out. You don't have to like part of that process is just crying. And I'm very much the same way. And so I'm glad you brought that up about like with Aurora of that like I don't there are times because my daughter has a lot of big feelings and I get a little I'm like I don't know what you're saying. Okay? Like and I try to and I'm very particular about the way that I word it. I'm just like I need to be able to understand you. Like, I
Yeah.
can't help you if I can't understand you. So, kind of one of the things that we do, I'm always like, can I hold you? And so, like, I will hold her while she's crying,
Mhm.
let me help like regulate like her actual breathing and like
Yes.
everything. So then she can calmly like tell me what's going on. And I think there's a big difference in that because I think we did very much grow up in that, okay, you just got to stop crying. You got to suck it up. And I was very much afraid of that, like with both of us, like being single moms and obviously having so much on us and
Mhm.
us fortunately being in situations where we've talked about this a lot personally of that, like, we don't have I hate to say it this way, but the luxury of falling apart.
Yeah.
Because
Yeah.
we are solely dependent for like these tiny humans. And so I have been trying to figure out the balance of and I wonder if that's something that like you have like figured out of that again, I don't have the luxury to fall apart. Like, I have to get up each day. I
Mhm.
have to take care of my child. I have to all these things, but I also don't want her to repeat that pattern, you know?
Mhm.
Be different the big difference between, like, the what your upbringing, like, versus mine was that my mom was also a single mom.
Yes.
And mom was that my I never saw my mom cry, ever. Like, my mom held 2 jobs, always. Never saw
Mhm.
her eat, go out with friends. She never dated. She never did anything. Like, everything was about her working and taking care of her kids. And so I realized that I have so much of that in me. And so I'm trying to, like, unlearn that because I don't wanna
Yeah.
pass that on to Delia. And so what does it look like for us to know that we really just can't fall apart? Like, we don't have like that type of like steady community on the daily
Mhm.
living with us, but also wanting our kids to be to freely like express themselves. So like what is the balance with that?
Yeah, so I will say, because I just had this happen recently. So, when I was first, with Aurora at a very young age, every time that I cried, she would cry, right? Because she was at such a young age that she just thought, "Hey, if mom's crying, something's real bad, so I better cry too," right? So there was a lot of time actually where I couldn't do that, and that was really difficult for me.
Mm,
But just recently, we were on a ferry back from somewhere, headed home, and I just I knew something was happening. I I in real time, it was hitting me like, you know, if I do this, I know what's gonna happen, right? I know it's gonna end something and it's gonna hurt. And I just looked at her and I just said, "Hey, we're on the ferry. It's really late at night. I just need to cry about this." And and I was like, "I know you wanna go up on the ferry dock and you wanna, watch the water and stuff as we go, but it's the middle of the night anyway. You're not gonna see anything. Can we stay in the car and have this quiet moment where I
yeah.
can just, like, let this all out," right? And she kinda knew what it was about, so she asked me, she goes, "Is this the problem?" And I go, "Yeah, that's the problem." And she was like, "Can I get out of my seat and sit next to you?" I said, "Sure," 'cause, she's in a car seat still, so she's behind me, but we're parked, so it's fine. So she gets out and she just sat next to me and she just put her hand on my arm. And every once in a while, she'd, take a break. She'd go pick up a toy or something in the back seat. She'd, do her edge a sketch, whatever. She would take these minutes. But she is now at an age where she can at least handle that my emotions do not have to be something that she internalizes. And I think that that is a big turning point for me in terms of not just telling her, "Hey, it's okay to cry," but demonstrating it for her, demonstrating that it's okay to have these, like, big emotions over, um, things that to somebody else might not be a big deal, or that you can have them in the moment that you're having them. But it was really a struggle for a while. It was really hard. So now, although I don't do that as well, like if I don't have that quiet space, if I don't have space to myself for a little bit, then it's harder. But I do try and take the moments when I have them now. And if I'm gonna cry, I want her to be able to see that. I'm not trying to burden her with that. I'm not trying to ask her to be, part of it necessarily. But I'm not gonna hide my emotions from her. And I think that there's this wonderful thing about being at an age where she's able to do that. And I'll also say that, like some people might say, well, you know, until they're older, that's not fair or something. But I think that that's the wrong approach. I think that the best thing that we can do is make sure that our kids get to see us being human, and taking the opportunities when we do have them. Because yeah, there are times where I would love to, have a meltdown about something or be frustrated about it. But I also try and like name those things for her, even if I can't have that moment. I'll just be like, hey, right now I'm stressed because of X, Y, and Z, and it's making me short with you, but what I really need you to do is just like get through these next, 2 errands with me, right? And then we can talk about it, but I need you to, be on board. Let's get in lockstep. Let's do this, right? And I think that being able to take that time and name that with her, even if we can't process it, tells her that like, hey, 2 things can be true at once. Inside you can be having your breakdown, whatever it is, your emotion or whatever. It doesn't have to disappear just because you can't process it in the moment.
Right in that moment. Yeah. Do you feel that I'm wondering with you saying that if kind of our generation and like particularly like us growing up in this particular scene and with that comes a lot of like trauma dumping through like
Mm.
online tools, like all of that was such a huge part of just like our culture. I'm wondering if we have kind of created this problem like within us of like what you're saying you're trying not to do with Aurora, of having her taking on other people's emotions. I'm wondering if in our efforts to not feel so alone, that we in turn created this thing where we are oversharing, we are sharing all these things, we're putting everything out there and everybody is consuming every like I'm telling y'all, like I know a lot of y'all probably listening to this, we're not part of like Zanga and Live Journal World, but if you the thing is that y'all call trauma
Oh
dumping
God.
no idea. You have no idea. Like, that was what it was just straight trauma dumping all the time, and so, it just kinda hit me while you were talking about that, of that I wonder if in our efforts to be so open and, like, sharing with each other, that was where we really started learning about soaking in other people's feelings and feeling like we have to be consumed by what everyone else is feeling.
Hmm. Yeah. Well, here's the thing. I think that what you're calling soaking in what everybody else is feeling, I think is called um, reawakening to empathy. I think that there's a lot of stuff that's wrong in this world that we kind of do need to be more consumed by if there's going to be any chance that change happens in those things. But I think you also have to, people talk about this all the time with everything that's going on in the world right now, is that you really also have to protect yourself, right? And so
Balance.
the thing yeah, so the thing that I try and do now, in my own experience, and I think that as she gets to a point where she doesn't wanna just go, 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 and she actually wants to talk about things, it's something that we can model, is now I try, if somebody offers to listen to me about something, I try and, preempt that a little bit and go like, "Hey, look," especially if it's somebody who's relatively a stranger, because I think folks online that are around our age tend to be pretty willing to be like, "Do you just wanna talk about it? Like, do you want to trauma dump on me?" I tend to be like, "Hey, like, I don't know what your capacity is. I don't know what you're going through. I don't know what you're already holding on to for yourself, for whoever you know personally, et cetera, et cetera. So, like, I appreciate that offer. How do you really feel about extending that offer if you were to know, like, I need an hour, or if this is going to contain these topics, or if I need to do this without receiving feedback about it, just listening, right?" And I think that that's where we get some of those topics that are more like, not some of the crises that are happening in the world, but feel like personal crises to us. I think that's where we bridge that gap, right? I think that we do need to have more empathy for a lot of the bigger things going on, and I think that we do also need to prepare people who offer to, basically take our trauma dump in one-on-one circumstances more with like a disclaimer before we get into it, right? Like, let me really check with you. Your offer is probably genuine in the sense that you are just trying to be kind, but is your offer genuine in the sense that you're actually able to receive that?
Yeah. I think consent is really important. And like, whereas, like, I hear you, what you're saying is that I think as a whole, like, the society needs to be a lot more empathetic. But I also think that we as a society also struggle with boundaries as well, especially in these like personal situations. Cause I don't think it always has to be strangers. I think so often in like some of our deepest, like closest relationships, we really need to get into the habit of recognizing that just because this is my best friend doesn't mean that like I can trauma dump, like all the time.
Mhm.
I think like even just like one example, like with us and like our friendship of that, like one thing I think we're both really good at is asking what the other person like what we want the end result to be. So
Mm,
like do you want me to respond or do you just want to like talk about this? Um
mhm,
I think we are really good about that. Like something that I know I want to like personally like work on though is kind of working on the time limits of being like, because I think that's really great of like what you named of like, hey, listen, you said you're here, but this is actually a 3 hour thing. So do you
yes.
3 hours or do you just have until you make it on your drive? Which I think
Right.
we do. Like sometimes just like, hey, I've got this drive, like whatever you can
Yeah.
get in this 40 minutes, like this is like what we've
It's
got.
yours. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's something that we need to practice, like, in our relationships, because I think that's kinda what I was thinking about within emo pop punk culture and all of the trauma dumping that came with that, of us really just trying to figure ourselves out, like, through this music and through these communities. I think inadvertently, like, it has become this thing where there wasn't a lot of consent within this, you know? Like, I think there was this idea of that you're here, you're relating to these things, you have all these same struggles as me, so that means that I'm just gonna put it all out there to you. And so I think a lot of us have continued well, I won't say a lot, I'll just say me personally, recognize
Mm,
that I have continued so much of that like into adulthood now of that I don't know how to have those firm boundaries. Cause obviously, yeah, if it's someone that's dealing with addiction or self-injury or just like cultural like harms and stuff that are happening, I'm like, I experienced all these things. I
mhm.
can't shut someone like off from that. But yeah, so I want to go ahead and wrap up. So, just final thoughts from you about choices that you're making as a mama, like now, and how you feel the way we grew up within this emo pop punk world has really like influenced that.
Um, well, definitely like one of the biggest things is I take my kid to concerts. My kid is going to the scene with me. She's already been to like over 30 shows and she loves it. And I think that that's great. But I think that the reason why I did that with my kid is because my big takeaway from my parents is that, like, if you can relate to somebody on a certain level, then you care more about helping them find outlets for things, right? So, like, here we are. They've recognized my outlet. I'm just sharing this with her. I don't, at her age, who knows? Her outlet could be a million different things. We're going to figure that out with time, right? But I think that it's saying, anything that you're interested in and also anything that I'm interested in, we get to share. And anything that you need to explore has this whole big world is out there, right? And we can explore whatever it throws at you with something that is available to us, and just making sure that she knows that community spaces exist in multiple formats in so many different places. And then outside of that, just knowing that, like, we have language for things now. And you don't wanna use it right now, Aurora, I get it. You're doing your own thing. But, may it just even if it's not clicking with them right now, even if it doesn't resonate with them right now, keep using the language that you know and the tools that you know so that they at least have the awareness of them, because that means that one day they're gonna have something to touch point back to in the event that they do need it.
I love that. I feel that it's important to know that, like, we're not just raising kids, we're raising the kind of children that we felt that, like, we needed to be, like, during that
Mhm,
time. So I sound so cliche and throwing all that stuff out there, but, like, it really is healing, like, our inner teenagers, like, through, like, raising our own kids, and I think that one thing this emo culture, like, really gave us the language for were feelings. Like, that's something we've talked
mhm,
about this, and not just giving us the language for the feelings, but taught us that there is so much power in that vulnerability, and there's so much power in, like, being able to get that out and using that pain to create art and create connections with people that ultimately, like, save lives. And so I think for me, my final thought that I want to leave people with is that there's so much beauty in nurturing that, like, in your kids. There's so much beauty in, like, teaching your tiny humans that their hearts are safe with you and that their feelings are valid and that they're open to, like, share those type of things with you. And, like, the same thing with you with, like, going to shows, like, that is such a big thing for Delia and I, as obviously we're flying to Seattle to see you and go to a show, like, in just, like, another month and a half.
can't
Um
wait to see you starting line.
Good, yes. Shameless plug if y'all wanna, like, upgrade our tickets or anything. Um,
Yeah, let us meet the band.
yes. But, like, sharing that with her and even just like we said with the playlist and the music and stuff, of wanting her to know that, like, obviously I am always here and she can share these things with me, but, like, there's so much power in, like, art that is being created from these feelings, and that even if her words fall short
Mm,
at any point, like, there is a song that's
mm.
and I want that to be enough for her. So,
Yeah, what's that, thing that floats around the internet a lot right now? Like, "I can't name this feeling, but hold on, I can find a song that says it perfectly."
it's like, I mean, it's so cliche, but we've seen also that line everywhere on stitched on pillows and everything of, like, when words fail, music speaks. Like, that is
Yeah,
such a real thing, and
mhm.
those of us that grew up in this emo pop punk world, like, this is, like, it's so cheesy, but, like, it wasn't a phase, mom, like
It wasn't a fave.
It's continuation. I think it really has shaped and molded us into, like, who we are. And so I'm grateful for, like, this segment that we do of the podcast of really showing that, like, it started off as this cheesy joke thing of, like, oh, it wasn't a phase, but it is true of, like, how this really permeates, like, every aspect of our lives. And so it
I
was great
know.
to have this conversation with you today to talk about how it's impacted the way that we mother. So
Yeah.
go for this time.
Okay, until next time.
Halito and salam, y'all. Asada here, single mama, community organizer, entrepreneur, and your resident elder emo. For so long, I chased the perfect outcome and missed the magic in the mess until one day, life just kind of hit me with a holy reality check. Now I'm learning to find beauty in chaos, those dirt under your fingernail moments. And that's what Watching the Bloom is about, embracing growth one petal at a time. If today's episode resonated with you, hit subscribe on your favorite platforms, leave a review, and share this episode with someone who's blooming too. You can keep up with me on all social media at Asada and on my website at asadablooms.com. I'll see y'all next time as we dig deeper, grow together, and bloom beautifully, mess and all.